Hello, this is Michael Smith, and I am a member of the PhD program at Liberty University. It's my pleasure today to share with you some of the research that I'm working on for this class that we're enjoying together. And I wanted to spend just a few moments talking about something that I'm very passionate about. My field of history is American religious history. And during the courses that I've been taking for the PhD, I have sought to elaborate on some things that maybe we take for granted as far as teaching and thinking about American history. Sometimes we have a lot of media that may be false and lead to wrong conclusions. One of the interesting things that I'm working on for this class is George Whitefield and the Great Awakening, and how that Whitefield's religious fervor also kind of laid the groundwork for the coming American Revolution. And I want to spend a little bit of time today talking just about that and the effect of something that he was doing that was different and new and innovative, and that also probably played a role in the start of the American Revolution. The article that I'm reviewing is Frank Lambert's article called Peddler in Divinity, George Whitefield and the Great Awakening, 1737 to 1745, found in the Journal of American History. Whitefield was actually born in 1714 and went to Oxford. While he's at Oxford, he became friends with the Wesley brothers, John and Charles Wesley, and he, in 1738, was invited by them to come to the American colony at Georgia to help them there. They were doing some mission work, and there was a great number of orphans in Georgia due to the fact that the British had emptied their debtors' prisons in Georgia without any skills or tools to work with, and a great number of the adults had died from exposure. Southern Georgia was very swampy land, and so with their reduced, abilities to withstand medical problems, many of them died. Whitefield took to heart the building of the orphanage, and this became a piece of what's going to later determine most of his life. So Whitefield begins to travel in an itinerant capacity and begins along the way to spark and to stoke the Great Awakening that was happening also at the same time. Lambert's article is about his ability to sell and to distribute materials, which was fairly new at the time. Most people weren't thinking about marketing, but he becomes actually the first religious marketer of goods. One of the sources that I'm using as an alternative source is the Life of Benjamin Franklin, Volume 2. Franklin and Whitefield became really great friends. They're on polar opposites when it comes to religious things. Franklin is a deist, and of course, George Whitefield begins the Calvinistic Methodist. And so they're on opposite ends of the spectrum, but they become friends in that Franklin is a noted printer, and most of Whitefield's sermons Franklin will print. He actually goes out to hear Whitefield speak and transcribes his sermons, brings them back to town and sells them. And a large part of Franklin's wealth comes from his reprinting of Whitefield's sermons, and they remain friends throughout their life. It's really quite an interesting companionship, friendship that they develop. One of the things that happens with this itinerant ministry goes to the very heart of the British Anglican Church. They are not evangelical. They're not evangelistic. In fact, most churches don't even have a space for anyone to wander in off the street for services. Most of the pews are subscribed to by families, and the father will have a key to the pew. He lets his family in. They sit in the pew. When they leave the service, they lock it back. There's not a lot of going into the highways and hedges kind of an idea to win people to Christ or with the message of Christ. So Whitefield and the Wesley brothers in England take to the streets and begin to preach in the squares, which was anathema to Anglican clerics, and so most of their pulpits were closed to them. When Whitefield came to America, this itinerant business is going to cause a lot of consternation, because think about this, the churches are not very closely connected. They're widely separated by distance. So there's not any comparison of pastors and what they believed. And so when Whitefield starts going town to town to preach and to share the gospel, Now they suddenly have another preacher to compare their pastor to. And so you'll see a lot of problems with this. The consequences, as David Morgan says in his article, actually begins in South Carolina, where the commissary of the Anglican Church in Charleston calls Whitefield to account and asks him to appear in Charleston, in which he does, and he admonishes him to stop preaching in the pulpits or in the fields because it's causing problems with local Anglican clerics. When Whitefield does not do that, this commissary brings him up on charges before the magistrate. And so this great controversy comes about and causes a lot of social upheaval, even though there's some already there. The Great Awakening will exacerbate that. Robert Russell, in his article, The Great Awakening and a Historical Analysis, talks about the social and cultural things that happen not only because of the Great Awakening, but as an extension of what was already going on in the society. It raised the ability to dispute and to argue and to debate in the American colonies, especially between issues of religion and politics. And this is going to kind of break down a barrier that I feel like will be a move towards the American Revolution. People become much more comfortable because of these religious debates and their connection with the government of the church, as the Anglican Church is. It's going to break down that wall of separation between church and state, which already existed before. And so as we move forward to the revolution, there's going to be an increased not reticence, but an increased indication that people are willing to argue and debate things like religion and like politics, freedom, and the rights of men. So Whitefield has a pretty major role to play in this, and his marketing of materials is going to stoke the flames that of the Great Awakening, but also this idea of disputing and arguing different points. And he becomes the first marketer in America in this kind of a globalization move. You're going to see that they use the same tactics in the revolution. I think that may very well be due to Franklin's influence with Whitefield and seeing how successful he was in marketing his religion with the printed page. When the revolution comes about, of course, they use the same kind of thing, sending horsemen out to give warnings, just as Whitefield did. They would send horsemen out into the countryside and say, Whitefield is preaching today at 2:00. People would just drop their tools and grab their horse and run for ride for the city just to hear this great man of God. They also will use the printed page in the revolution. Thomas Paine's Common Sense actually was used to sell the revolution and the idea of fighting back against the British to the common man. And most people are literate. That's the interesting thing about the society of the day, was the great deal of literacy that was there. So people could actually read and could actually understand these arguments that were being printed and sold. And once, when Whitefield came into Boston on the ship, the entire ship was, the whole of the ship was full of his books and his pamphlets and things that he was going to distribute at his meeting. So it was much more than him just preaching. He's going to leave behind materials for people to read and to understand the different doctrinal positions. And so this disputation that will increase throughout and beyond the Great Awakening will, I think, prepare the way for an acceptance of the American Revolution. I hope this does make some sense, and I look forward to your comments as we talk further about the materials that we're looking at. Thank you.